Okay,
Dr.
Ankur, I
Harsh.
think,
Yeah.
we are on time, and since it's really a tightly packed thing, I really want to thank Bombay Ophthalmic Association, Dr. Manish and Ragini and sir for having us here, Rahane sir. So I think we can start off. Manish, you are there. Can you? I
Yes,
think
sir. I'm there, sir.
Yeah, sure.
Good afternoon, sir.
Fresh and handsome as ever. So please, Manish.
Hi, Manish.
Hello, sir.
That is why
I was
they
listening to the discussion, so I'll share my screen, sir.
Yeah, please go ahead. So Manish will be telling us about management of neovascular glaucoma. Please, Manish, stick to your time because
I'll do it, sir. Sure, sir.
Yeah,
so, without wasting any time, thank you so much for this honor to being part of this program and this esteemed panel of speakers and panelists. So, I'll be talking about the management of neovascular glaucoma. I'll just share one case to make it a little more practical. And I think all of us are seeing a lot of neovascular glaucoma in last year or so in this lockdown period because patients are coming late and they're not able to have regular follow-up. So this is a 55-year-old gentleman, known hypertensive diabetic, came with decreased vision for 2 months and pain for 3 days. And on slit-lamp evaluation, as you can see, there were new vessels in the iris. Patient had a RAPD with 660 vision and mild corneal edema and 42 millimeter pressure in the left eye. So left eye had a neovascular glaucoma. You can see the new vessels in the iris. You can see on gonioscopy, there were extensive new vessels in the angle, but the angles were open. So basically, and fundus has a CRVO with macular edema. So basically, this was a case of neovascular glaucoma in open stage. So in neovascular glaucoma management, there are a few very important things. One, what is the stage of the disease? And what is the visual prognosis and what is the etiology? These three factors are extremely important whenever you're managing a case of neovascular glaucoma. And as I was telling, last year or so, we are seeing a lot of neovascular glaucoma patients. And as we know, the more and more diabetic and hypertensive patients are there, and we are getting the neovascular glaucoma is not a very rare type of secondary glaucoma, but it is definitely one of the most devastating form of secondary glaucoma which we see. Like any other secondary glaucoma, the treatment is you treat the cause of neovascularization and you control the intraocular pressure. So it's an approach, you have to combine both of them. And if we see 100 patients, 97 patients is because of retinal ischemia. So any patient in neovascular glaucoma, majority will be either a diabetic retinopathy, a proliferative type, or a CRVO, or the third common thing is the carotid obstructive disease. So we should also do a carotid Doppler in case the other two are not there. Coming to management, we should know the stage of the disease. So sometimes it can be pre-rubeotic, that is you have a CRVO, but there is no new vessels in the angle or the iris. So these patients are managed by the retina team. You have to treat the retinal vein occlusion or the proliferative diabetic retinopathy, and you have to make sure you monitor the pressure, do a regular slit-lamp evaluation and a gonioscopy so that you detect those new vessels timely. The first stage is the rubeotic stage, when the vessels, new vessels have already developed over the iris or the angle, but the pressures are still normal. In this case also, you have to treat the cause of rubeosis and you have to monitor the intraocular pressure. The third stage, where the glaucoma doctors especially come in, is the open angle stage, where the IOP has already increased, but the angles are still open. In this case, again, you have to control the intraocular pressure along with treatment of retinal problem. And the fourth stage, which is the most devastating, is the angle closure glaucoma stage, where because of the proliferation of neovessels, the fibrovascular membrane has formed, and that membrane pulls the iris towards the trabecular meshwork, causing the closure of the angle, what we call as the angle closure stage of neovascular glaucoma. Overall, prognostically, it has been seen that patients post CRVO NVG have the worst prognosis compared to a diabetic retinopathy or a carotid vascular disease. And overall, over a 2-year follow-up, they have found to have a poorer vision in patient post retinal vein occlusion. So early diagnosis is definitely key, because the earlier you diagnose, the much better is the prognosis, because diagnosing in a case like this is neither very difficult nor very rewarding. So coming to early detection, as I was telling you, in all these patients who are predisposed for neovascular glaucoma, like a proliferative diabetic retinopathy, patient with CRVO, you should have a high level of suspicion. Every patient with CRVO, you should have a monthly undilated 80 slit lamp and a gonioscopy for at least 6 months, so that you can detect these new vessels in time in the angle or in the iris, and you can take the action aggressively. So Treating the cause with the pan-retinal photocoagulation is the most important treatment for retinal ischemia, but there are a lot of patients who come at a stage when there is media opacity. So in these cases, anti-VEGF injection definitely has a role. Retinal cryo can also be a good option for these patients. Patients who are presenting with vitreous hemorrhage, you can have a pars plana vitrectomy with the endo laser for treatment of rubiosis and ischemia. Anti-VEGF have come up in a big way in these patients because, as I was telling you, a lot of patients, if you're not able to control with medication, you're planning for surgery, you can use anti-VEGF to control the new vessels, and you generally operate after 3 days to a week time because it reduces your chances of hypema and improves your overall success of the patient. Also, in patient with macular edema and media opacity, anti-VEGF has a very good role along with pan-retinal photocoagulation. To control intraocular pressure, the best drugs we have is the beta blocker along with the carbonic anhydrase inhibitor and brimonidine. Now ROCK inhibitors have also come. They can also be used in patients with neovascular glaucoma along with oral acetazolamide. We avoid prostaglandins and pilocarpine because these patients generally have a component of inflammation. Steroids have a role because these patients have inflamed eye, there is pain, there is ciliary congestion. These cases, a steroid and low dose steroid can be useful to decrease the pain and inflammation, and it will also improve your surgical success. Cycloplegics are also important to give symptomatic relief to the patient. So those patients who are not able to control medically, definitely the role of surgery is there. The two best options we have either is a trabeculectomy or a tube surgery or a shunt surgery. So trabeculectomy, whenever you're doing, you should be doing it with antimetabolites. The overall success is less than what we see in primary glaucomas. Personally, I find I've seen the tubes do very well in patients with neovascular glaucoma, especially most of the patients who come to us in glaucoma clinic generally have synechia formation, there is inflammation, and the ischemic factor is an ongoing factor like in diabetic retinopathy, or if the patient is having associated vitreous hemorrhage, these patients shunt do better because they have less dependency on inflammation. But if you see the published literature comparing trabeculectomy and Ahmed glaucoma valve, overall the surgical success is poorer compared to primary glaucomas, but have been found to be comparable. There's another study, very recent study in 2019, where they had a meta-analysis. There also they found that Ahmed glaucoma valve and TRUM have a similar IOP control when it comes to neovascular glaucoma. But in more complicated type of neovascular glaucoma, like patient where there is vitreous hemorrhage, need a pars plana vitrectomy. This particular article has done a study and they have shown that the success of trabeculectomy is as low as around 40 to 46% compared to 70+% in patient with Ahmed glaucoma valve. So definitely in complicated cases, Ahmed glaucoma valve does better. This particular survey was done by American Glaucoma Society for glaucoma experts in US, and they found that Ahmed glaucoma valve is the preferred line of treatment as a surgery for patients with neovascular glaucoma compared to trabeculectomy. There are certain cases where cyclodestruction like cyclocryotherapy or a diet cyclophotocoagulation definitely have a role, especially in those patients with poor visual prognosis where you mainly want symptomatic relief and you don't want to go for a complicated surgery. In case you have access to endoscopic cytophotocoagulation, that also has a good success rate, but the machine is not freely available in our country. Just to summarize, we have to treat the cause, but related to IOP, first important thing is what is the visual prognosis. If the visual prognosis is good, you be aggressive with your management of intraocular pressure. Don't start with one drug, start with 2 drugs, 3 drugs, including oral Diamox. Bring down the pressure. If you see even with the medication, you are not able to control the pressure, go ahead with surgery. Because in these patients, timing is very important, and most of the patients who become blind due to neovascular glaucoma is mainly because of optic atrophy. But if you see the vision prognosis is poor, in this case, the treatment will be mainly symptomatic with topical steroids, cycloplegic, and cyclodestruction. So to conclude, the key in management is early detection and timely detection. Have a collective approach. You have to involve your retinal colleagues in the treatment. And whenever you have any new vessels, be aggressive. Be very, very aggressive in treatment. Don't start a medicine and see the patient after 10 days. You have to see the patient every 2 or 3 days to see how the patient is responding to your treatment. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Manish. Dr. Paranjpe, do you have something to?
No, just a time reminder, nothing else.
Yeah, okay, fine.
Yeah, he was precisely on 8 minutes.
Yeah, good. So
Manish,
once
the first speaker is precisely on 8 minutes, everybody follows the.
Yeah, good.
Thank you,
just,
So
sir.
it's a very precise talk. Thank you very much for that.
thank you very much, Manish. Wonderful talk. Just one quick question, because
Yes, sir.
most of the people in India will not be able to do a valve. So if they are forced to do a trabeculectomy, what will be your one or two hints to them that they are forced to do a trabeculectomy in NVG? What should they look for and what should they do?
So, sir, whenever you are doing a patient with trabeculectomy in a patient with new vessel glaucoma, first you have to have a proper pre-op evaluation that there are no new vessels in the iris or the angle. If there is active new vessels, active inflammation, you control it with steroid, give an anti-VEGF to regress these new vessels, because with active new vessels, you are bound to have hyphema. And whenever you're doing trabeculectomy, use mitomycin, preferably in a higher dose, like for example, maybe a 0.2 for 3 minutes or zero point 0.4 for 3 minutes. And again, these patients post-operatively also, you need to keep them under close follow and use releasable suture, release them early, because a lot of these patients will have a lot of red blebs in post-operative period.
So good, Manish. I think that is what I wanted you to tell, that at least 3 days prior, you must give a anti-VEGF so that the vessels, even if you can't see them. And one hint I'll give to everybody, that if sometimes even after this you open and you find their vessels, use your cautery probe to do the peripheral iridotomy, pick it up, do a cautery and then cut it so that the vessels don't bleed. Thank you very much. I think we'll go on to Ankur. Ankur,
Yes, sir.
please be ready with your slides, and he'll be telling us about management of angle closure. And Ameya ji, Dr. Ameya, I'll request you to collect any questions they are and keep asking if they write after the speaker, if at least 1 or 2 questions are there.
Yeah, sure, sir. I'll do that. So, is my screens visible?
Yeah, fine.
Yeah. Thank you, BOA and MOS. Thank you for giving me the opportunity, and happy to be a part of the panel where my mentors, my seniors and friends are there. So I'll be talking in brief about approach to angle closure disease. It is one of the most fascinating of all the glaucomas and one of the great masquerades in ophthalmology. It may have subtle symptoms of headache, brow ache. Sometimes they are treated as migraine, and sometimes they are entirely asymptomatic, rapidly marching towards blindness. They may also land up with surgical emergency room diagnosed as acute abdomen because of visceral features. And most of the times it is a failure of not doing gonioscopy. So as high as 40% of OAG patients, angle closure patients are being diagnosed as OAG as per one of the studies in India. So the mechanism of angle closure is appositional closure of peripheral iris with the trabecular meshwork. The various mechanisms which lead to this is pupillary block, inflammatory membranes, mass lesions, and disorders of ciliary body and iris. Overall prevalence of angle closure glaucoma increases with age, and as per the Western data, the OAG is much more common as compared to ACG. But the Indian scenario is absolutely different. So we find angle closure glaucoma almost as common as open angle glaucoma, if not less. Now, there are various terminology and subtypes of this glaucoma which should be taken care of. PACS, or the primary angle closure suspect, is a patient who has occludable angles. That is, the pigmented trabecular meshwork is not seen beyond 90 to 180 degrees of angles in situ gonioscopy, that is, without manipulation or indentation. And any evidence of goniosynechy or pigmented trabecular meshwork would point towards conversion of PACS to PAC, that is primary angle closure. Then we have various forms of glaucoma, and based upon the symptoms, IOP, fundus changes, and field changes, they can be divided into acute or intermittent PACGs, acute PACGs, and chronic PACGs. Now, parameters that govern the part of spectrum of this disease are the amount of trabecular meshwork occlusion, the rapidity of occlusion, and the ease of reversal of the trabecular meshwork block which we are having. Also, it is important to note that a lot of patients are less than 40 years of age, so there is a term called as juvenile PACG which is being used these days. We should also know that a lot of patients do not have symptoms, like a lot of subacute patients do not have symptoms, and as high as 80% of chronic patients do not tend to have symptoms, as we read in the book of pain, headache, brow ache, and color halos. Now, primary angle closure suspect is characterized by shallow AC and occludable angles. YAG-PI is to be discussed with the patient, and one can exercise the option of YAG-PI if the patient is going to be lost to follow-up. But it is important to keep the patients on follow-up and do a YAG-PI when they shift to PAC. Now, this is a patient who is having occludable angles. So we can see occludable angles here, angles are closed, but as we indent, we can see opening of the angles. Whenever we see these goniosynechy or pigmented trabecular meshwork, this points towards the conversion of PACS to PAC, and YAG-PI is mandated at this particular stage. Subacute angle closure is characterized by normal symptom-free intervals. Then there are brief episodes of dull age, blurred vision, colored halos. They also have shallow ACs and occludable angles. Now, this is a patient where we can see this anterior bowing of iris, shallow peripheral anterior chamber, and this is an early PES formation, which we can see here. Precipitating factors for a subacute attack are dim light, fatigue, near work, and it resolves spontaneously with sleep, bright light, and lying supine. Acute angle closure is characterized by symptoms of blurred vision, intense pain, congestion, lay dilemma, visceral features, and diaphoresis. We can see corneal edema, circumciliary congestion, vertically dilated oval pupil, shallow anterior chamber, very high IOPs, and disc edemas. Now, this is a patient of acute PSEG where we can see very shallow anterior chambers, peripheral iridocorneal contact. We can also see the glaucoma flecken here, and on the gonioscopy, we have a lot of blurred vision because of corneal edema. So as the cornea clears up, we do a gonioscopy, we find the angles are absolutely closed. So acute angle closure patients have a history of premonitory attack. That is, they do have intermittent or subacute attacks in as high as 1/3 of patients. Precipitating events could be mydriasis, illness, emotional distress, or intense concentration. Chronic angle closure is characterized by chronically elevated IOP, shallow AC. There could be fundus changes typical of glaucoma. Gonioscopy would show signs of angle closure, intermittent acute attacks. And we have to understand that CPACG is progresses much faster than POAG. And there are two paths to progression, that is a gradual path formation or a creeping angle closure. Now, management line is a YAG-PI, medical management, and followed by surgical management as we do for all other glaucomas. Now, let us talk about DESI evidences in management of glaucoma. What do they say? So, 5-year conversion rate of primary angle closure suspect to PAC is 22%. That is, during the 5 years, at least 1/5 of PSCS will convert to PAC. That is why we should discuss YAG-PI with these patients. Subacute PSC is more common in 40s and 50s, and 2/3 of them can be controlled by only with laser PI. So laser PI is an important tool in management of subacute PSEGs. 5-year conversion rate of primary angle closure to chronic PSEG is 28%. Nearly 1/3 of them will convert. But out of these 1/3, with LPI, only 11% will convert. Rest all will not convert to the chronic PSEG. So LPI is 3 times more protective in prevention of conversion from PSE to CPSEG. Bilateral affected eyes are more common in subacute patients. An absolute eye is more common with chronic angle closure glaucomas because it tends to progress faster. Iridotomy alone can control IOP in as high as 2/3 of patients in subacute PSEGs and 12% in acute cases. YAG-PI alone with topical drops can control as high as 50% of acute ACGs, 2/3 of subacute ACGs, and 1/3 of chronic PSEGs. So that is why YAG-PI is mandated even in chronic PSEGs eyes. Now, what is the role of lens extraction these days? Now, this came into picture because of this study which talked about early lens extraction in angle closure glaucoma. So we should have a detailed look at the study, what it was actually. So first of all, 50% of patients of PSEG were excluded from the study. So it is not applicable for all the patients of PSEG. The IOP was less than 30 millimeters of mercury on applanation tension, not on NCT. There were 10% of patients who underwent goniosynovial at the surgeon's discretion. So we don't know what was the outcome of these patients. Also, degree of synovial and oppositional closure was not reported in these patients. Patients and investigators was not masked. The bias of study was towards the surgical interventions. So out of 805 patients, 386 were not included in their study. The outcomes in terms of pressure were not much difference in terms of LPI versus early lens extractions. So it was a small difference of 1.3 millimeters of mercury. Similar was the outcome in case of visual field analysis in the change in terms of mean deviation of visual fields. Complication risk was definitely high in surgical group as compared to laser PI. So in the lens extractions, in my personal opinion, the eyes with moderate rise in IOP, minimal or no disturbance of visual acuity because of the clear lens, no or visual field loss, none or no visual field loss, none or minimal optic atrophy, a surgical intervention creating a pseudophakia is not justified. So to conclude, LPI is still the established first-line form of treatment. Lens extraction, which is clear, and not cataract is not justified as of now. Early identification and proper management is key to prevent blindness because of chronic angle closure glaucoma. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Amit, do you want to ask something? Dr. Porwal?
Yeah, good evening, sir.
Amit, do you want to say something on this talk or?
I thought you were asking Amia, so I was keeping quiet. Actually, excellent talk, Ankur. It was nicely covered. And the most important thing which you highlighted was the role of lens extraction. I mean, there's a bias. Everybody justifies the Eagle study, the non-glaucoma specialist, and they want to do early lens extraction to treat angle closure glaucoma. So very nicely covered up the whole topic. And the key message what is delivered is lens extraction is not an answer as a treatment for angle closure glaucoma. You have to do a LPI. That's what I would like to say.
Okay, good. So Ankur, very nice talk, and I will never forgive you, because even as a student, you do not quote my papers which talk about peripheral iridoplasty, both for acute and for chronic angle closure, which are published papers. So
But it was very nice. The Desi evidence is what he mentioned. Desi evidences.
I'm going to, yeah, that was the best part of it, the Desi. But I have to catch him for that.
Sir, we have do have a question for Dr. Manish Singh.
Yeah.
When will you advise cataract surgery and NVG is the question.
I think in a patient with NVG, our primary aim will be to control the rubeosis and to control the intraocular pressure. Once you have managed it, eye is quiet, maybe you can keep a gap of 3 months or 6 months. If in case you have done a trabeculectomy or a shunt, you can keep a gap of 3 months or 6 months and then go for a cataract surgery. Although rarely in some cases with NVG where there is a significant cataract and we are planning a shunt surgery and the chamber is extremely shallow, we have removed the cataract also along with the shunt surgery. So that can be done, but mostly we do the control of intraocular pressure and do a cataract surgery later on.
Okay,
So
thank you,
3 to
Manish.
6 months.
Generally 3 to 6 months.
Can I ask?
I think we take the questions later. Okay, please, if it is for Ankur, then we can go ahead. Is the
It
question?
was for Manish.
Manish, yeah, you are very popular. Chalo, go ahead, please. Go ahead.
Dr. Manish, how early means the sense that if it is an early cataract, can you go ahead with this neovascular glaucoma, or you want to wait?
Sir,
Did you get me?
can you repeat the question, sir? What is the question?
If it is an early cataract, can you go ahead with removal of cataract, or you want to wait for a longer time? I
think we should wait. Like the cases which I shared, like there have been, like I had a patient with NS3 with cortical cataract. So if it's a visually significant cataract and you feel that removal of cataract may help you in surgery, then for example, I give an example of a glaucoma shunt surgery. You have a 360-degree synechia with a shallow chamber. There is no place to keep the tube. So if you remove the cataract, you can put the tube behind the iris over the lens. So those cases, a cataract surgery may help. But if it's a very early cataract, a cataract surgery will increase the inflammation, will actually worsen the prognosis of your trabeculectomy or a shunt surgery. So I personally believe your aim should be control the rubeosis, control the pressure. Once the eye quiet, after 3 or 6 months, you plan a cataract surgery.
So excellent, Manish. Very good answer. That ideally, the point is to control the NVG first. The cause of NVG must be taken care of first. And with an early cataract, neither the PRP nor those things will be difficult. If you feel those things are difficult, or like Manish gave you an example that putting him in a tube is difficult, yes, then you can do. So do we have Tanuj over here? Tanuj? Dr. Jansari
I'm here.
is not there.
I'm here.
Ah.
Mine is fourth, na?
No, Dr. Jansari is not there, so better.
Okay.
So please share your screen and please go ahead. So we are really looking forward to this talk because Tanuj does most complicated surgeries. And so we'll really love to see this. You want to... okay.
My screen is visible now?
Yeah, good. Perfect. Go ahead.
Okay. Let me start my stopwatch first.
That's okay, don't worry. We'll catch you.
Okay.
And tell Dr. Vaidya to catch you if you go too much overboard.
So I have no financial disclosures, and I thank Manish Sir, most sweet, humble glaucoma specialist, and this you can't refuse his invitation. So I'm presenting. So this is a patient, 40-year-old patient who came with pressure of 2 millimeters of mercury, pseudophakic patient, cricket ball injury. So multiple referrals. well-formed AC on the eye looks quite nice, but with 2 millimeters pressure, and patient is reporting that post-cataract surgery vision was good, but his vision is now 20/200. So you have to intervene in such cases because otherwise he is going to lose vision. And on gonioscopy, you can see the problem is that there is a large, nearly 180 degree of cyclodialysis. That means disinsertion of the ciliary body from the sclera. So that is causing the hypotony, and there is no conservative management in these cases. You will have to open up and suture the sclera back, sclera and the ciliary body together. And you can see the hypotony maculopathy that the patient is having. And you can see on UBM, although the gonioscopy was diagnostic, large cyclodialysis cleft, disinsertion of ciliary body from the sclera. So the aim is to close this cleft. So this is the surgical video. You have to do intraoperative gonioscopy to localize the area, and you can mark this area because after you put the traction suture, it rotates. So you should always mark the area, and then you have to expose the entire area. Because these eyes are hypotenuse, it is better to put a viscoelastic, otherwise dissection is difficult. So now, like you do in a trabeculectomy, you are making a lamellar scleral flap. Now I told you this is a very large cyclodialysis. And then this is very critical. You have to, this is the endoilluminator I'm putting at the limbus. And see here, this is the area of this, you can see black here, and this is the area of the detached ciliary body. So through transillumination, you can see this area is showing illumination. Ideally, the ciliary body should have been present here. So you can localize your area of, and then what you have to do after you have raised the lamellar scleral flap, you have to make a full thickness entry and expose the ciliary body. Now, because this is a very large cyclodialysis cleft, so I have repaired it in parts. I have done this flap, but not opened the entire thing because it's become difficult to suture. So I've opened the 50%, and you can use 10-0 simple suturing or 9-0 Prolene. So the basic technique is that you have to suture the sclera to the ciliary body and back to the sclera. And ideally, you should first pass the sutures and then tie. Then you are sure that you have included the ciliary body in all your sutures. So multiple applications, sclera, ciliary body, and then I'm opening the other half. And similarly, you suture the entire opening, and now you see the difference. This entire area has turned black now. So that shows that your repair has been successful and the ciliary body is now relocated and attached back to its normal position. And after you have done this, to be extra sure, you apply 5 seconds of cyclocryo basically to induce inflammation, so that in between the gaps you have left, there is inflammation and closure. Then you close your superficial scleral flap and close the conjunctiva. So with God's grace, we could manage this patient post-operatively. And this is 1 month post-operatively. His ciliary body is reattached. You can see the closure of the cyclodialysis cleft. And we were very lucky. The patient regained 6-time vision and was very happy. This is another interesting case. This was a case referred, and patient appeared to be had hypotony and no leakage. This was nearly 2 months after surgery, and there was no leakage, obvious leakage visible. But when we did the UBM, you could see a large area of aqueous reservoir. So that means shallow AC large, there is an over filtration occurring, although there is no obvious leakage. So in such cases, you have to go in and explore and see what is going on. So traction suture has been applied, and this is the area of the trabeculectomy that has been done. A little bit of xylocaine application. And then you try and dissect and see. You have to open up the entire trabeculectomy bleb. And now you have to see from where is actually the leakage occurring. And now I'll put the Trypan blue. And I'm just taking off the episcleral tissue. And now you see, when you put trypan blue, you can see there is a large defect. So here, this area. So excess cautery has been done. The flap has, there is shrinkage of the flap. And on the lateral side, this area is leaking very profusely. This was under the episcleral tissue. So we couldn't make out. So only when you explored, you could make out this area of defect. So then we thought of a innovative technique. This area we have to cover. And that time we had not arranged for the IBank sclera. So what we did was we raised a lamellar scleral flap from the horizontal side and reflected it on to the area where there was a leakage. So just see again, this is a crescent knife. So you are you're dissecting it and then reflecting the flap onto the area from where you saw there was leakage. So this is like a transverse Momini's repair. And then you apply sutures and close this area. And good thing is that your posterior filtration is still okay. Because if you close this area, then it will go other way around, it will go high. So you have done a transverse repair and the posterior filtration is still intact. So this is a case which was repaired, and then you check this leakage from here has been completely sealed. And then you have to close the conjunctiva. And in this particular case, we are using the Ologen implant because you can't use mitomycin C and you want to prevent the post-operative fibrosis to some extent because a very young patient and you have to have the trap function for a long time. Although now we have stopped using the Ologen implant because long-term results have not been successful. So this is the repair being done. And this is the post-operative appearance, and the bleb has been repaired, and we have successful in treating the hypotony, and this is the repair of the patient. So now I have reached 7 minutes and 45 seconds, and this is the ASOCT of the case. So I'll just stop here, and thank you very much.
That was absolutely wonderful, Tanuj. But at least the Cyclo one, I think it is safer to refer to you than to try and do it ourselves. So, Dr. Vaidya, any comments you want to make? Deepak? Dr. Ameya?
The most important thing is to do prayer before you operate these cases and after post-op also.
Sir, I think these presentations should come with a warning. Do not try this at home.
No, but
I have a question to Dr. Tanuj. I just wanted to ask at how many degrees of cyclodialysis you will consider for taking to surgery? I mean, is it only the number of clock hours of cyclodialysis left which is taken into account, or the IOP also as an indication for cleft repair surgery?
if you have a very small cleft like 1 clock hour, you can attempt just cryo or laser. But whatever I have done in my practice, they have been more than 3 clock hours. So I've had to open and close them because it's a one-time surgery and very massive dissection, and you don't want the patient to come back. Other techniques have also been described. If you are doing cataract surgery, along with that, you can put an endocapsular ring and that can tamponade on it. But I find the open repair with trans-illumination, that is a foolproof technique, and that is you should adopt for majority of the cases.
So,
Can I add something? This is Dr. Ganesh.
Yes, please.
Thank you, sir. If you don't have access to a illuminator, you can use the microscope and half illuminate the eye. You can still see a trans illumination.
Yes.
That technique is also you can use.
Yes, even a small pen torch you can use. That is not an issue. You can
Or
see
the
the
light
ciliary
of
body.
indirect from the other side or something.
Yes.
Tanuj sir, one small question on the case. When you're suturing the ciliary body to the sclera, you are using what kind of a traumatic needle, or you're using the spatulated needle?
No, 10 spatulated needle. I'm using 10-0 without, there is no need for any special suture. Some people also advocate ninoprosine, but I have used just a 10-0.
But the ciliary body doesn't bleed at all in this.
No, you saw, these are, old cyclodialysis. So I have seen there is no bleeding. Only thing is when you dissect, you have to be careful. You don't puncture it when you open the ciliary body with a sharp knife. That is the only precaution. It doesn't bleed.
Okay, wonderful.
Tanu
Thank
sir,
you so much.
Tanu sir, 1 second. Can I ask you one question?
Time.
Okay, fine. Go ahead.
Okay, Vedya, last question fast.
Yeah. What about the Prolene suture and nylon suture? Over which we will prefer if you are going to suture with 9O, Prolene or nylon?
No. Preferable is Prolene suture. If patient
suture.
you can get, that is preferable, but don't use the long needle one because that becomes problematic while suturing. It is very difficult to manipulate because you require only small area hitch of the ciliary body.
Okay.
So use a regular needle, not the long needle one, Prolene.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, George, you are there? George? Is George Purthan there?
He was here only. Yes.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'm here.
Please go ahead, George.
Yeah. So thank you very much, sir. So I will try to cover the indications and surgical technique for sulcus placement and pars plana tube insertion of aqueous drainage implants in our hands, because this is not very frequently done. Yeah. So the main indication is of a sulcus placement is anterior PAS, and most commonly seen in post keratoplasty eyes. So even in a phakic eye, you can get this tube safely into the sulcus because the iris is plastered to the. In many of these cases, the iris is plastered to the cornea, and obviously the advantage is that your tube is as far away from the endothelium as possible. Again, situations where you have anterior PAS in secondary childhood glaucoma, like Axenfeld-Rieger syndrome. Some of these children with congenital cataract surgery, glaucoma following congenital cataract surgery, also may have focal areas of PAS where we can take the advantage to place these tubes in the sulcus. Again, hydrocorneal endothelial syndrome is also an indication when there is anterior PAS to get the tubes into the sulcus. Dr. Manish was mentioning this after NVG, combined cataract and tubes, you can place these tubes safely into the sulcus. So the surgical technique is not very different from your usual anterior chamber placement when you have anterior PAs, because the tip, that dramatic change from the needle entry being sclera parallel to the iris parallel occurs almost at the same point, because the iris is plastered to the endothelium and your sulcus is quite wide. So this is an Axenfeld-Rieger where the tube goes into the. I think there is some disturbance, but now the challenge. Now the challenge for sulcal placement of tube occurs in eyes with high PAS on gonioscopy, but anterior chamber looks almost of the normal depth. The issue here is if you have to get it into the anterior chamber, the tube has to pierce through the iris, and we have some measurements. We use these 4 mm scleral needle tracks to insert tubes into the anterior chamber, and we have some measurements where we feel that it's between this 2.8 to 3 millimeter areas where we dramatically change the entry at the limbus to get it nicely positioned in the anterior chamber. And so, to give you an example of sulcus placement in an eye with high pass. So this is the mental calculation we have to do. Where do we dip into the anterior chamber to get the needle track into the sulcus? So the 23 gauge needle track needle is advanced, and if you see carefully, it is this. Once we reach this area, that is just about 2.8 millimeters. We rotate the eye slightly forward and dip and dramatically change the position to become iris plane parallel, but the needle enters the sulcus between the iris and the PCI. Actually, there's a little bit of posterior synecdoche onto the lens, so it will have to be released. So another thing we have observed in any, even in anterior chamber or sulcus placement, if you trim the tube to whatever length you want it in the anterior chamber, like in this case, we are planning for about 3.5 millimeters. So if you drape the the tube over the cornea, trim to 3.5 millimeters, and place this tube 2 millimeter medial to the original position of the tube, you can rest be assured that you still get 3.5 millimeters of tube in the anterior chamber. So a little bit of help with a paracentesis and a cyclodialysis spatula, you will easily get the tube has reached there because of the posterior synechiae. It is still not visible. A little bit of manipulation there, and you can easily get the tube into the sulcus. And you won't get too much of bleeding here. So I know that there have been techniques described where surgeons do a peripheral iridectomy and then try to place the tube through the peripheral iridectomy through the sulcus. You can take advantage of any pre-existing surgical PIs to get the tube in the sulcus and flat on the iris as far away from. For example, this eye had a PK. Now coming to pars plana tube insertion, some of the most common indication for us is you're planning a concomitant VR surgery, and that too in some of these bad siliconoid glaucomas that we have to. The glaucoma is refractory, and you plan for a tube insertion also along with siliconoid removal. Another indication for pars plana tube insertion is even some of these eye syndromes, they don't have adequate space for even a sulcus placement. Here we have to do a lens sparing vitrectomy and keep the tube into the vitreous cavity. Some of these phenophakic lenses where we have to combine vitrectomy, lensectomy, and pars plana tube insertion. And a short video on how the pars plana tube insertion is done in our hands. We mark 3.5 millimeter of the tube anterior to the limbus, trim it. Everything else is the same except for the 2 venting slits were already placed here, and now the vitreoretinal surgeon takes over. So he does a complete vitrectomy. See, you can see a lot of anterior PAs, absolutely flat chamber, a complete vitrectomy, and then one of the port, the supratemporal port near the tube is used to insert it can be a 23 gauge, it can be a 25 gauge, doesn't matter. The tube just is easily inserted into the vitreous cavity. And also we need to inspect for proper positioning. Here, the tube is clearly seen in the vitreous cavity. Sorry, I'm just not able to. Okay, so now in previously vitrectomized eyes, you can also take advantage, especially if the conjunctival mobility is very poor at the limbus. You yourself can use, we glaucoma surgeons can just use a 23 gauge needle. Only thing is it has to be perpendicular to the globe, and it just goes in and comes out. The bevel of the needle just goes in, comes back. Again, we need to ensure that the tube is seen post-operatively so that it is not inadvertently placed into the choroid. One very important prerequisite is that you need to have a complete pars plana vitrectomy for pars plana tube insertion, because any minimal vitreous left behind, even the vitreous base should be adequately shaved to facilitate pars plana tube insertion. Otherwise, you will have situation like this where we had to do a re-vitrectomy. And for anybody who's interested, we also have published our results of pars plana tube insertion 2 years back in the BJO, which will give you more clarity on the indications and the surgical technique. Thank you very much, and I would specifically like to thank Dr. Manish Shah for this wonderful opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, George. Listening from the master and the innovator, it is really great. It is really nice to hear your views on this. Anybody has one quick comment from anybody, because I don't think really there's much to say on this because he's so perfect. And so you, like you rightly said, George, that sometimes going through that route will give rise to bleeding and all. And people who are like me and you who are used to doing posterior valves may sometimes choose to do that, unless, like you rightly said, there was a synechia formation over there. So rightly, it's not a very commonly used thing. Anybody else? Quickly.
George sir, one small question.
Yes, Sachin.
Of late, you stopped using the donor cornea and scleral patch graft because of the posterior tube insertion. Am I right?
Yeah, totally.
So, but the how posterior is it safe and that the tube does not erode?
See, Sachin, the tubes do not erode 4 millimeter posterior to the limbus. If you have seen, all those tubes which erode are close to the limbus. Very rarely do they go. So having a 4 millimeter scleral tract is sufficient, and you don't need to use the patch. But the key is to have an adequate depth of the sclera also, so that your tube is well buried in patient's own sclera.
Okay, so in that case, when you are using the needle track, it is sufficiently long, say around 2.5 millimeters scleral pass followed by the dip inside. So in that, do you need a larger gauge needle to negotiate the tube, or is the same 23 gauge needle enough?
Yeah. 23 gauge needle makes a track into which tubes of all glaucoma drainage devices usually snugly fit without peritubular leakage. But I think some surgeons prefer to have 22 gauge at the entry. But we prefer 23 gauge throughout.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, George. Amit, please go ahead and share your slides. And he'll be talking about a very common subject, cataract and glaucoma together. Thank you, George, for a wonderful thing.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Harsh, sir, for inviting me for this talk. I thank Dr. Manish Shah, Team BOA, and Team MOS for including me in this great scientific fest. So today I'm going to talk on coexisting disease, that is cataract and glaucoma, which is most common. So we all know that both the diseases are most common conditions which are associated with the aging process, with an increased risk of nucleosclerotic cataract with elevated IOP and glaucoma medications. So modern cataract surgery has become one of the most successful rehabilitative microsurgical procedures. But when we look at our success in the management of glaucoma, either medically or surgically, it has not yet achieved the similar results what we have achieved with a cataract surgery. So the patient's expectation is a functional result similar to that achieved with the modern cataract surgery. So proper counseling is a must when we are dealing with these patients. So how do we manage these coexisting conditions for the best possible outcome? We all know that the surgical correction of visual disability cataract will not rehabilitate the glaucomatous loss of visual field and visual acuity. So initial decision making is crucial in determining the type of intervention in these coexisting diseases. So basically there are three surgical approaches. First approach is the cataract extraction with IOL implantation alone. Second is the sequential surgery, wherein you do a trabectomy alone, followed by cataract surgery. It is also called as a two-stage procedure, and then you have a combined cataract and glaucoma surgery in the same sitting. So what are the indications for cataract extraction alone? Especially when you should have a visual disability cataract with IOP under good control, you have mild glaucomatous damage, minimal visual field loss. A patient is on 1 or 2 well-tolerated topical anti-glaucoma medication, and also he is compliant with the anti-glaucoma medications. The advantage is there's a long-term IOP reduction of up to 5 years. There's less need of post-operative medications, and there's a smaller reduction in mean IOP by 1 to 3 millimeters after the surgery. Disadvantages being with an early post-operative IOP rise in these patients with pre-existing glaucoma, especially in the first 24 hours and maximum within 2 hours after the surgery. So you need a close monitoring and prophylaxis medical treatment to control this IOP. Then you have the two-stage procedure, that is a sequential surgery, wherein you do a trap first, which is followed by cataract and IOL later on. So what are the indications? In this, the glaucoma dominates the clinical picture. There's a significant optic nerve damage, there's an advanced visual loss. Patient is on uncontrolled glaucoma despite maximum medical therapy and laser trabeculoplasty. The advantage is it eliminates the need of anti-glaucoma medications and improves the quality of life and vision enough to delay the cataract surgery. In some cases, cataract surgery can be done 4 to 6 months later on once the filtering blood is well established. Disadvantage, basically it needs 2 separate surgical procedures. Filtering surgery might hasten cataract development, and cataract surgery might have an adverse effect on the pre-existing filtering blood. Then you have the triple procedure, that is a combined cataract surgery and combined cataract and cataract extraction glaucoma surgery. Indication being patient should have visually significant cataract with glaucoma under borderline control despite maximum medical therapy and laser trabeculoplasty. Adequate IOP control but significant drug-induced side effects. Glaucoma with history of non-compliance with medication. Is an adequate IOP control on well-tolerated medical therapy but advanced glaucomatous optic atrophy. Is an uncontrolled glaucoma and urgent need to restore vision or when 2 operations are not feasible. So advantages, we all know that it eliminates the need of 2 separate procedures. The early post-operative IOP rise is significantly less. There's a significant improvement in visual acuity. At the same time, IOP is being addressed and there's decrease in the number of glaucoma medication. So when we look at sequential surgery versus combined surgery, sequential surgery is better than combined surgery or vice versa. There is insufficient evidence to support this concept. The decision as to which option is to be adopted should be based on the specific clinical scenario and the comfort level of the surgeon after discussion of the options available with his patients. So we all know the preoperative consideration. As I told you, we should know what is the real cause of vision loss. We should do a proper slit lamp examination to look for the pseudo exfoliation, shallow AC, myotic pupil. The fundus examination should be done properly. The techniques of handling myotic pupil, basically, we all know that most of these people have irreversible miosis. So we should be prepared with ring hooks or expanders. If you are doing an SICS, stretch pupilloplasty, microspherectomy, viscoelaxation, sodium bicarbonate is a viscoelastic substance of choice. It should be thoroughly washed at the end to avoid any post-operative IOP spikes. HPMC causes less post-operative elevation compared to this high-density viscoelaxations. Adequate traxes and IOL selection. A big no to AC IOL. Rest all the other IOLs can be implanted. So the techniques: cataract extraction, that is the sequential surgery. Cataract extraction incision should be positioned to maximize the blood survival. Cataract extraction site depends on the location of the filtering blood. Temporal location is preferred. Phaco with foldable IOL to a clear cornea incision with or without surgery is the surgery of choice. Synechrosis should be done if any synechrosis is present due to previous surgery. And intraoperative complications, especially vision loss, have been associated with blood failure. Triple procedure, you have the single site and the two site. Single site, basically both the procedures are done to the same site, and twin site, you have the superior trap and the temporal phaco. So just showing two small video clips of single site surgery and the twin site surgery. So I have the single site surgery. I'm showing you an SICS plus trap, and the two site surgery. Some problem with the. Just give me 2 minutes. I think videos are. In the meanwhile, Dr. Ash, can we take 1 or 2 questions? I'll just make sure that the video is shown. This is a 2-minute video. I think the system is getting hanged at my end. Dr. Harsh?
Yeah, Sachin, any question for Amit till he opens his video? Anybody else? Medha? Vaidya?
May I ask something?
Yeah, please, sir.
Yeah. When you are doing combined surgery and when you are using mitomycin C, what specific precautions you take so as to avoid mitomycin C going intraocularly?
Should I answer this question?
That's for you only.
Yeah, okay. So one important thing when you're doing a mitomycin application is you should always use a wet sponge. You should not use the cotton swabs. You should make tiny cuts of the wet sponges. You should always count how many wet sponges you are implanting subconjunctivally, and you should count while implanting, and you should also count while taking it out. And once you're taken out after the desired time you have put, you should wash thoroughly all the mitomycin which is there. At least what I recommend is 30 ml of RL should be used to wash thoroughly on either pockets, on either side of the lateral and medial pockets, and also posteriorly. You should try to wash it. So this is very important. You should not use cotton swabs, because if you use cotton swab, any cotton fiber remains behind, then that can cause complications due to mitomycin.
So what basically I am doing is that I am doing the trap part first. So the mito is done, everything is made. There's no entry into the chamber. And once you wash it off nicely, then you can go ahead with the cataract part. So but some people who are doing together, it may be a little different. Amit, are you getting your videos?
Yeah, I was ready with my videos. If you want, can I just?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah. So this is the top video which I'm showing is basically the SICS trap, and the bottom video is a phaco trap. So initially, whenever you plan for this combined surgery, you should always take the traction suture properly. Whether you want to take a corneal traction suture or the superior traction suture, you should have an adequate traction suture. Always use a caliper and measure the site of the limbus, how much big you want to make the congenital flap. So when I'm using an SICS flap, I make a 6.5 millimeter or 6 millimeter congenital flap. I mark it on the conjunctiva and the limbus. And when I'm doing a phaco trap, I usually mark 4 millimeters on the limbus. So marking is very important because that shows how big your flap is. Then do a clear-cut subconjunctival dissection. Always make sure that when you're doing the subconjunctival dissection, there's a diffuse dissection posteriorly and on the medial and the lateral side. You want a diffuse blood, so dissect as much as possible. And when you're doing the cautery, use a gentle cautery. You already see what complications can occur due to excessive cautery. So identify the bleeders and just cauterize the bleeder. You should have adequate cautery. You should not over cauterize it. Next is again marking the scleral flap. You should always mark the scleral flap on either side of the limbus, and then using a 15 number blade, I make a triangular flap. That is the preferred flap of the preferred shape of the triangle, the scleral flap which I plan. And you can see whenever I'm using a mitomycin, I use a waxed sponge. I count the number of sponges which have been used, and then after you have removed, you wash it thoroughly, brush the conjunctiva so whatever fluid is remain, it is ironed up properly, and then again remark the scleral flap, and then do a scleral dissection. Tip for scleral dissection is you always hold the tip of the scleral flap, raise it up with the help of forceps, and just touch the cutting edge of the 15 number blade at the traction side. So the moment you pull the scleral flap, just touch the blade and there's a cut. So by doing that, you get a uniform scleral flap. So once the scleral flap is there in SICS, what you're going to do is you now start the normal manual small incision cataract surgery steps, what you're used to it. So take a crescent and start doing an SICS tunnel, and then all the steps of SICS are followed. When you're doing a phaco trap, that is a twin side surgery, once you've created the scleral flap, then from superior side, you have to shift to the temporal side and then start with the clear corneal phaco or scleral tunnel phaco, whatever you're used to it. I prefer clear corneal phaco. And in this case, as I told you, we always come from, most of the time we come across small pupil, non-ready pupil. So you have to be ready with any pupil expansion devices which you are going to use. I prefer the pupil expansion devices than the iris hooks because I don't want to have too many cuts at the limbus to insert these iris hooks. So rest the cataract surgery procedures are same what you are used to it. So because of paucity of time, I won't go much in detail of the cataract surgery. So coming to the once you implanted the IOL.
No, I think you're way above time, so I think we can just finish it off.
Okay, so I just
questions. I think this is standard. You have shown well, and you have shown the SICS, which was more important because I think everybody is doing this. Thank you very much.
The important is releasable sutures. How to do the releasable sutures. Thank you, sir.
Okay, wonderful. And I think we had the question. We have time later. We can discuss. Come back here and discuss some of the other questions because this is an important topic. So I think Ganesh, you are there.
Yes, sir. I'm here, sir. I'll share my screen.
Yeah, please share the screen.
Yeah.
And you were doing this surgery yourself right now?
Which one, sir? The non-penetrating deep sclerectomy. Yes, sir. I'm doing that. Before at the outset, I'd like to thank MOS and BOF and particularly Dr. Lahane sir and Manisha sir for giving me this opportunity to speak to you on non-penetrating deep sclerectomy. And we all know TRAB is the procedure of choice, and deep sclerectomy is a lot of
his voice. Can you hear us, Ganesh? You're not. I think there's a
network issue at his end.
His voice was anyway not coming well. But now till he unshares, we can't even move forward. So can somebody ring Ganesh? Ameya, can you ring Ganesh? Anybody who has got Ganesh's number?
I think his Wi-Fi has gone. Ganesh's Wi-Fi has gone.
No, but he has to remove the thing from there, na? Otherwise we cannot even proceed.
Okay.
Yeah, good.
Ganesh, your Wi-Fi is not working. He's not there, side.
He's not there?
I have called him up.
Now you can take next one, na?
Yeah, so sir, I will start this thing, and by the time he comes, then we will take his lecture.
Yes, good.
Thank you, Amit. Thank you, Dr. Amit.
Okay, are you getting my slides?
Yes, sir, your slides are visible.
Okay.
Thank you, Ragini ma'am. Thank you, Rani sir. Yes, sir, it is visible.
Okay, fine. Let's go ahead then till George comes back into action.
Ganesh.
So I think
Ganesh, sir.
Ganesh.
Ganesh. Okay, we'll go ahead with the first slide. And this is a young 22-year-old one-eyed girl who came to us. The other, she had uveitis. The pupil is stuck. Multiple PIs were tried, which were failed. So there's an iris Bombay. The pressure is 28. There is a posterior subcapsular cataract. She cannot see through it. The vision is barely 660, and that too bad. The other eye surgery had been done, and the eye was lost. So she was not ready to touch this eye at all. And that is when we thought so much what to do, because she was not ready for the surgery. So this is how the YAG laser iridolenticular synechiolisis were born, in which what we do is we stretch out by giving the phenylephrine, and then in the area which is now, this is a normal lens underneath. So we just hit the synechia near the iris, starting inferiorly, going on either side up, and it takes almost 4 to 5 sittings, because the area bleeds, and then you move on and the area bleeds, and then there's a lot of haze and you can't do it in a single sitting. The power to be used is very minimal, 0.5 millijoules, but it is possible. And what ultimately you find is that the pupil dilates fully, and therefore no need for the iridotomy, because the thing is now leaking from here and the pressure becomes good. And not only that, because the pupil is dilated, she could see the things from the side. So this was a procedure given for the first time in the world literature. And beyond that, the smile on that lady's face is something which will stay with me forever. And in the hard times that we have in glaucoma so commonly, it really helps. So you can see how it really works wonders. It's a difficult procedure, but not really so difficult. If you hit on the synechia towards the iris side, the lens really never gets damaged, because the power that you're using is very little. Another case that was referred to us is like what Tanuj was showing. There's a diffuse bleb, and there's macular hypotony, dysesthesia. So one part obviously is to take the patient for surgery. But short of that, can we do something? So we said, okay, let's try out something. So what we did was we painted the bleb with gentian violet. And then what we did was that we started putting spots which are large. That is 300 to 500 micron argon spots. You can use any, you can use a diode, any photocoagulative laser, which will scar out the superficial conjunctiva. And so in that case, what ultimately happened was this whole thing, this got scarred. And because it was scarred, the whole fluid absorbed. It absorbed from here, and you can see how beautiful the thing becomes. And what was a huge choroidal absorbed by itself completely in itself. Again, if there is a superficial bleb like that, which is forming a Delon, the patient is having a lot of problems, you can actually take to the OT, and you can cause them do these sutures. But short of taking to the OT, what you can do is a similar procedure. You can paint it with the gentian violet, and then give the things which exactly like we showed you with the argon laser, and you can see it flattens out nicely. Now, one of the most underrated technique is the peripheral iridoplasty, but I can promise you, I have given it, and the last time I came to Bombay, one of the girls stood up and told me that, yes, I tried and it worked so beautifully. Most of the people are just not trying. All you have to do is you have to give a large spot, the same 300 to 500 micron of any argon or frequency doubled ND YAG. The idea is less power, wider spread, and less time, so that it just scars superficially and opens up the angle. Now you can use it either with a gonioscope, or you can even do it directly. And what basically happens, it's a classical thing for plateau iris. So that in the case of a plateau iris, what is happening is that even with a patent PI, the whole thing is getting closed up once the pupil dilates. In this kind of a situation, what you basically do is that what I showed you, you put a larger size, 300 to 500 microns on the edge of the iris, just near the root of the iris, and you can put multiple spots over there separated by one spot size. You can do it through a gonioscope. Previously was you can do it directly. So these are the ways to do it. Extremely simple. Anybody can do it. There's hardly any side effects, so nothing to really worry about. And this shallow chamber, as you can see, the angle really opens up nicely. The same thing you can see in an anterior segment OCT, how the angle deepens up. But the greatest benefit that I found was it's a lifesaver. So we had this one-eyed patient, very fussy, very elite, and came with a pressure of 48, had been to multiple hospitals with a lot of mannitol, everything, nothing is sorted out. And obviously with the pressure of 48, the pilocarpine is not penetrating, nothing is going in, and short of doing a surgery, everybody told, okay, we can't do anything, we'll have to do a surgery. So I thought before that, can we try something? I suddenly remembered Dr. Lamb had given in 1998 that we could do a thing which will help us. And so we did through the thing only, we did an iridoplasty, and within 1 hour, this is the result. The entire pressure came down. You can see the cornea is totally cleared out. And later we were able to do an iridotomy and everything went well. So I want to tell you, every one of you can do it. It is the simplest of simple techniques. People just don't try it. Even in cases of intumescent lens, or there's a topiramate-induced ACG. Both these cases, cataract, you are going to ultimately take out the cataract, but for that time, even if you do this procedure, the pressure comes down and you have time on your hands. Same with topiramate. You have to take out topiramate, but till the pressure comes down, if other things are not working, this works wonders. Again, in cases of chronic angle closure glaucoma, the paper we published in 91, if the pressures are just partially controlled on full medication, if you add gonioplasty all 360 degrees around, and if the angle opens up at certain areas, the pressure can come down by almost 3 to 4 millimeters, and you may be able to control the pressure. So difficult PI, again, you can stretch out the iris from all sides, and by giving a gonioplasty kind of a spot on all sides. Again, you have made an iridotomy, but you are not happy. You just want to enlarge it a little bit, give one shot of iridoplasty kind of a thing on either side of the thing that you have already made, and it just widens up, as you nicely see. And it's used in malignant glaucoma also, where the basic idea is that the pockets of fluid can be broken open, but obviously it has to be done with usually in cases where there is no lens as such. So we have a pseudophakia or aphakia, then only you can do a laser iridotomy or laser vitreolysis. So basically you use a lens, and the trick is that if there is a posterior subcapsular, the PCO is there, then the PCO, the capsulotomy must be done so that the fluid that you are releasing from the vitreous actually travels through the capsulotomy, and then travels anteriorly. And then the flat anterior chamber can actually become suddenly deep. So before you go in for a surgery, if atropine medications are not working, this is something that you must try. Again, one of the many a times the blebs are so much vascularized. So we just did direct argon laser on these vessels, and sometimes you can see that the bleb really becomes much better. Thank you very much for your kind attention. So anybody has any questions on this? Ankur is still there?
Presentation, sir. I just had a question. When you do laser iridoplasty,
yeah,
for how long does it work?
Oh, it does work for at least 2 to 3 years easily, and sometimes even much longer. So sometimes once the peripheral areas are flattened out, you know, even in a routine iridotomy, if you have done an iridotomy and you do a repeat gonioscopy, you find here the angle is still very close. And if due to Valsalva maneuver, the iris is going to keep touching the cornea despite the patent PI. And so in these kind of situations, we are not comfortable despite a patent PI. You can do this iridoplasty, and I do it very, very regularly. So there's no need to really talk to anybody or think that it is a plateau iris, because to actually identify a plateau iris with gonioscopy is, I think only Tanuj can do it. The rest can actually just read it and forget it. So it's a tough card. So it is really, really useful.
Yes.
So do use it, because so many instances it will help you. And the biggest fun is that there's no side effect to it. Anybody, has he joined? Ganesh has joined back?
Yes, I joined back. And sorry for the interruption. I think some glitch in the internet.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
It got back immediately, but
yeah, please go ahead, Ganesh.
thank you, sir. Thank you. So I'll come to the, I hope my screen is visible now.
Yeah, fine. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'll come to the indications. The primary indications are primary open angle glaucoma, pseudoexfoliation, pigmentary glaucoma, intraocular pressure, which is not medically controlled, and patients who are poor adherent to the therapy. Relative indications include glaucoma and aphakia and high myopia. As you know, these are very high risk for failure and complication if you do perform normal trabeculectomy. Indication include angle glaucoma, eyes with extensive peripheral antiacynic and neovascular glaucoma, iridocorneal endothelial syndrome. As been mentioned before, tubes are better options for these, or even trab. Scar conjunctiva, traumatic glaucoma, angle recession, eyes with treated with argon laser trabeculoplasty are again not very suitable for this non-penetrating deep sclerectomy. So these are the basic steps. I'll come to the video. So you lift a superficial scleral flap, which is 50% thick, and then you lift a deeper flap, which is again 40% thickness. That means you're lifting about microns of sclera over the bed where the aqueous is supposed to form a lake. And then once you have gone as much anterior as possible, you strip the trabecular juxtacanacular tissue there, which forms the inner wall of the Schlemm's canal. And in this process, you have already de-roofed the Schlemm's canal. So, and then you can place a spacer device. These are the spacer devices which are available in the image. You can see it's a T-Flex device. And you have the Aquaflow, the HeLaFlow, the T-Flex, and also PMA implant. These are sutured to the scleral bed. Of course, in India, we don't use spacer devices. We use normal Halon to just fill that area, which gets absorbed slowly. So just to show you a small video. So you lift the deeper scleral flap using the routine instruments which you have. The superficial scleral flap with the routine instruments which you have. We use a 15 number blade, but in this video we are showing you with a diamond knife. And once you have gone as much anterior as possible, you have to go dissect into the clear cornea, and then you create a deeper groove to lift the deeper scleral flap. Now this is almost the whole thickness is 90% thick, so you have to separate the scratch incision and see whether you are close to the choroid, and just about 100 microns above that. You cannot measure it, but you have to have a feel of it, and 100 microns above that you lift the deep scleral flap. As you go anteriorly, you are de-roofing the Schlemm's canal. Now Schlemm's canal is de-roofed, and the moment it's de-roofed, you start seeing the aqueous percolating, and then you cut the deeper scleral flap. Now that area becomes the trabeculo-Descemet's window, and then you strip the pigmented trabecular tissue from the trabecular meshwork area. Once that is done, you have better percolation, and then you close the superficial scleral flap. You can place implant, as I mentioned, and you can inject Helon, or what we use is our sodium hyaluronate here, manufactured by Aurolab. No financial disclosure. And once you inject, you find there's blanching to your left of the vessels. That means there is a pressure difference which is created. So you find blanching to your right also. So that means that area has access to the aqueous veins, and you have better. Once you inject this for canalostomy, part of the steps, you can combine the steps also. And if you are not very keen for knife dissection, you can always use a laser. This is a carbon dioxide laser assisted deep sclerectomy in which you don't have to lift the deeper scleral flap. Once you lifted the superficial scleral flap, the laser will do all the work for you. It will ablate the scleral tissue in such a manner that the moment aqueous starts percolating, the effect of the laser is not taken up and you won't ablate further tissues. So you find that the moment the laser is being applied, you find aqueous coming out through there. That area will not take up the laser. So keep going on hitting with the laser, carbon dioxide laser, and then once the superficial area is ablated, you find that the trabecular Descemet's window is still intact, but there will be no perforation. There will be no. You can perforate, of course, if you apply too much of force or if you are not in the correct position. But if you're in the correct position, you won't have a perforation. It's quite safe, and this is quite popular. Also, Dr. Venkatesh does it in his advanced glaucoma patients. And then this is, of course, combined with a combined cataract and deep sclerectomy procedure. And the suturing same as previously described. And if you can also, you can introduce a probe. Not if you have a probe, you can, but we don't have one. So what we use is a 6-0 nylon suture or a 5-0 nylon suture, which Aurolab helps us with a bulbous tip, the manufacturing give it to us. And then we introduce it 360 degrees into the Schlemm's canal, and then use a 9-0 proline tied around the bulbous tip, and then retrieve the nylon suture. This is also possible. So you have a 360 channeling of the Schlemm's canal, and once you have retrieved the suture, so you are actually increasing the surface area of the Schlemm's canal. Once you increase the surface area of the Schlemm's canal, access into that area is much better and much better flow. They can also cut off the deeper scleral flap and suture the superficial scleral flap. So this is the proline suture, 9-0 proline suture has come out of the canal, and you cut it. You can reuse the 5-0 nylon, but we don't reuse it. We dispose it off. We contour things, and we don't want any false passage when we do the procedure next time. So we tie the proline suture in such a manner that it creates a little tension in the Schlemm's canal. And when you can see the suture 360 degrees. You can see the knot in the near the superior portion, and see the suture canal very nicely, very nice to and document. And once you have a suture tied it, deeper scleral flap, and the surgery if you want to. So intraoperative complication, number one is being superficial, so you won't find the Schlemm's canal. If you're too deep, you perforate the trabecular Descemet membrane. The initial learning curve will have a tendency to perforate up to 3%, which reduces to 3%. With experience, you can have small, round, linear, or transverse tears. Big transverse tears will cause the iris to prolapse, and you will convert into a trabeculectomy. Sometimes, if it is happening, you don't cut off the deeper scleral flap. You can do a trabeculectomy anterior to the deeper scleral flap. So post-operative complications include hypotonic choroidal effusions, which are very small in the periphery because of the low pressure. Small hyphemas because you have introduced the instrument in the Schlemm's canal and you induce hypotony, so there is blood regurgitation. IOP spice can occur, iris prolapse, transverse hemorrhage under the scleral flap. Malignant glaucoma has been described, but quite rare. Late complications include failure due to excessive scarring, progressive increase in intraocular pressure. Blebitis has been described. Cataract has a tendency to form, and sclerectasia if excess mitomycin C or cautery has been used. But in the literature, endophthalmitis has not been described. Two meta-analyses have been done. One mentions that the complete success without implant less than 21 millimeters of merger is 69%. Another meta-analysis done about 4 or 5 years later mentions the without implant the success 48%. With implant it's 68%, and with the anti-neutralized it's 67%. So success is not as good as trabeculectomy if you were to put it head to head, but in certain situations it's good. So to conclude, yes sir, that's
please.
Okay, sir. Thank you. This is okay. Thank you, sir. This is my last slide.
Before we conclude, I would
Thank
say
you for patient listening. Thank you.
There were 25 audience, out of which 7 were the officials. These figures may interest you. That is why I am telling you. 25 to 30 listeners, viewers, and 7 officials.
This is including the YouTube and this thing.
Sir, those are the statistics of the Zoom
No,
meeting
no,
which
no,
we are
no.
logged on currently.
Only,
Yeah, what you are seeing is
No, that is a Zoom meeting, sir.
Yeah, but
So
that is
you will not see the audience in Zoom meeting.
the actual
Yeah,
only
it will be
officials.
only those who are speakers.
These
Those
are
are only speakers.
Only,
Yeah.
yes.
These are not the audience numbers.
Only the faculty link. This is so.
Yeah, they have a different platform.
So don't get disheartened at all. We always keep believing they are there even if they are not there.
no, I am happy that we started on time and we are ended on time. That itself is a success.
We still have around 5 minutes till we get, because they are going to come at 5:15. So just 5 minutes. Anybody wants to ask Ganesh?
I would like to add. I would like to add something about mitomycin. We have made little innovation in this.
Yeah.
We cut the sterile, ethiosterile Shermer strips and then imprisoned into the mitomycin C just before starting the surgery, and we totally dried in the air. And those dried up impringed mitomycin C Shermer strips, which we can measure into 3 mm into 5 mm like that. We slip it behind underneath the conjunctiva. By that, there is no seepage of mitomycin C and touching to the conjunctival border or anywhere. We can measure about 8 to 10, keep it under the conjunctival surface, and then remove it. So they remain put there. So any other problem of mitomycin C is not there. This is a small modification which we have made.
But some mitomycin C potentiality, the potential of mitomycin C decreases very fast. The potency, it degrades very fast. So you have to use a freshly prepared mitomycin C solution.
Yeah,
in almost all cases.
Exactly. Just before starting the surgery.
Yeah, would it not be unpredictable, sir, once you dry it?
No, under surface of the conjunctiva is wet. So only that much area I will take up the mitomycin.
Okay, fair enough.
It's just an innovation which we did. There is nothing.
That's very nice, sir. I think we can all try that, and we'll see whether it works in our hands or not. But yes, that's a very good idea. Sachin, you had asked something about whether the tube is to be covered with sclera with.
No. We just asked Dr. George about. He doesn't cover the tube at all.
That is the paper that he has written now, which has come, and I have given a commentary on that. So you can read that later. But I'll tell you one thing, that especially for if you're doing an inferior valve, the superior valves are very good. With this they do well. But now I've been doing inferior valves for almost 10 years. So the inferior valves, sometimes if you have not covered, they tend to protrude out and extrude, and we all know that what bloody hell it is. So now all the inferior valves that I do, besides the covering with the top, our own sclera, the patient's own sclera, I'm covering the rest of the whole thing so that nothing at all is visible. This is just because in all our hearts, the thing is that the patient should remain safe.
Correct.
So, and we can keep trying things other than that.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Harsh sir, can I ask one question?
Yeah.
So Amit.
Yeah.
Amit, once you're going to do a combined surgery, how will you go about your EDOF and multifocal lenses?
I don't use multifocal lenses in my combined surgeries. I prefer a monofocal lens in all my glaucoma patients.
In case if the patient is going to opt for the multifocal, would you go at one go only?
No, I don't give him a choice of a multifocal lens. I don't give a choice of multifocal lens to a glaucoma patient.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that is very good answer, because I don't think we should use a multifocal in glaucoma patients at all. Because the moment the glaucoma gets advanced, they could be in serious trouble. So anybody else who wants to, Ankur, you have any different view on this?
No, sir. I also don't want to give a choice of multifocal lenses. In fact, I tell them that, as you said rightly, that if the glaucoma advances, we'll be in deep soup. So better to have monofocal vision lenses in the glaucoma patients.
Sir Lahane sir, you were saying something?
I think, yes, Sarj Kumar, I was saying that we always avoid the multifocal lenses in the glaucoma, and we should avoid it. My question to every glaucoma surgeon here is: the patients with one eye blind by glaucoma and other eye 0.9, say this CDR, patient comes to me. By me, how I treat, I will tell you. When patient comes to me with 0.9 cup in one eye, blind other eye, I send patient to Manish.
Yes, that is the best treatment.
My God.
So just one thing, we can, multifocal reduce contrast. So we can increase other parts of the vision by anything, but we cannot increase contrast with anything. So we don't have tools for that. So that's why we are avoiding multifocals.
So I think we must thank all the panelists and everybody on the board. It was a wonderful, wonderful meeting, and thank you BOA for having us here.